What's good everybody, this is CP and welcome back to another fantasy basketball video. Today I'm going to take a look at a few potentially underrated players for points and triples. If you're able to trade or get these players for the right value, they might be able to make a huge difference for your fantasy teams in the second half of the season. With that said, for 15 years of good luck in fantasy basketball, make sure you like this video within the next 5 seconds. I wouldn't risk it. So let's not waste any more time and So the first category I'm going to go into detail right now is for points per game and potentially to help everyone identify some sleepers. As you can see at the top of the list, we have Beal, Durant, Curry, and Embiid. So pretty much in summary, all the top scorers in fantasy basketball are pretty hard to find unless you drafted them, or if you were to trade for them, you'll probably have to pay a pretty penny to get them. Also, there's a huge correlation between top fantasy players and top scorers, because usually those guys are worth the most. As you can see from the stats here, also everyone in the top 10 are also probably top 20 to top 30 fantasy players, with Bradley Beal being 14th overall and then KD at 5th overall, and those two guys are averaging 33.3 points and 29.5 points. As we go further down the list, you can still sort of see that some of these names are probably going to be pretty hard for you to get for a trade, and more than likely they won't be lying around on the waiver wire, especially names like Antetokounmpo, Levine, Trae Young. You probably have to trade one really good player or two really good top 50 players to get them in your leagues. Now moving down the list, I think a name like Colin Sexton is probably one of the more underrated top scorers in the league right now, because as you can see, he's averaging 23.6 points. And compared to the other players on top of the list like LeBron James, Paul George, James Harden, I feel like Colin's name is not as big, and in a sense you might be able to get him for cheaper than those top household names. Just looking at his stats, you can see that his minutes are very consistent, averaging over 30 minutes a night for the last several games. He has the ability to drop a lot of points if he gets hot, and he also hits triples as well. And like I said in a previous video, his assist count is slowly going up. At the same time, his steal count is slowly increasing as well. So in a sense, Sexton's game is quite well balanced this year. So in some of your leagues, if you're looking for more scoring, then I would say Sexton might be a name that is cheaper to get compared to some of the top 10 guys. Now moving on, another name that I really like as a budget option for scoring if you want to boost is probably Zion Williamson. As I said before, he definitely has deficiencies in his fantasy game, especially his inability to hit threes and his bad shooting percentage at the line. But surprisingly, Zion has really picked things up recently. He's starting to hit some threes and the defensive stats are coming in. As you can see, he's getting blocks and steals as well. And surprisingly, his shooting at the line is slowly improving as well. So he actually went 9 for 11 at the line a few games ago, so that's a positive sign. And for minutes wise, his minutes are around 30 minutes, so overall those are pretty efficient stats. He's scoring almost 24 points a game in only 30 minutes of play. So if the Pelicans were to make big changes, let's say if they trade Lonzo Ball, or they even give Zion more chances to handle the ball, so I think his points per game might actually jump up to maybe closer to 25 points to finish off the year. Obviously, Zion, there are huge flaws with this game, so if you were to trade for Zion, I wouldn't recommend him for 3-pointers and to help you at the line. But overall, he does bring a lot of value, especially for points per game, and his field goal percentage is usually pretty solid because most of his stats are from close to the rim, most of his scoring I mean. At the same time, it feels like the Pelicans are using him as the primary ball handler more often these days, so his assist count might continue to grow for the end of the season. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him average closer to around 4.5 assists per game. So Zion is probably another more budget sleeper that I recommend if you want to go after points. Now moving down the list, I feel like a more underrated name for scoring is probably Malik Beasley of the Minnesota Timberwolves. As you can see right now, his fantasy stats has been pretty amazing so far, especially over the past month or so. and overall he's been averaging over 20 points and also hitting his triples at a very good rate. At the beginning of the year, I wasn't quite sure about Beasley's playing time because the Minnesota's backcourt is quite loaded, but surprisingly he's found a way to get minutes as he has been averaging over 30 minutes a night. And overall, I really like Beasley as an option, as a cheaper option for scoring, and you might be able to get him without losing one of your top end guys on your fantasy team. As to whether he can keep this up for the whole year, it's hard to say, but right now I don't think Minnesota has a lot of scoring options. So going forward, I think Beasley is a pretty solid player to add that can give you 20 points a night. Now moving further down the list, another name that has been surprising me so far is Eric Gordon of the Houston Rockets. As you can see from the stats, he's been averaging close to 18 points a game, but he's been really starting to cook things up over the past few weeks or so. So two of the most valuable stats that Gordon brings to the table is definitely his 3-point shot and his ability to score. So as you can see, he's been consistently putting together games where he's averaging over 20 points a game, and also throwing in 1 or 2 steals, which is nice. And traditionally speaking, Gordon is a very good shooter, so he won't hurt you at the line, but most importantly, the Rockets really like to shoot threes. So I think as long as Gordon consistently get minutes, he should be able to produce at a high rate for you. And getting 20 points a night for him is probably not that hard because he can consistently hit at least 2 to 3 3-pointers for you every night. So compared to everyone else on this list, I feel like Gordon is probably even easier for you to get than a player like Malik Beasley, because depending on your league, I don't think many people value him that high. So you probably might be able to trade one of your crappier players for Gordon. So if you were to ask me, Gordon is one of those cheap budget sleepers you might want to target in a trade or even pick up in leagues if he's still available on the waiver wire. Now moving on to triples, compared to scoring and points per game, I think this category is actually a bit easier to find on the waiver wire, especially later in the season. And depending on how deep your league is, you might be able to find some of these guys on the waiver wire. But obviously we can see right now Steph is leading the way along with CJ McCollum, who's having a great year, averaging almost 5 triples per game. And Dame Lillard is also a household name. But at the same time, if you look at the list of the top 10 to 15 players, there are also some 3-point specialists that aren't household fantasy names. So for example, if you can land maybe 1 or 2 of these players, they could be game changers for your fantasy teams every week, as all of these players have the ability to carry your fantasy teams in the triples category. And having them on your roster can actually carry your team from being a very average team to being a very good team. And one of the first names that pops up to me is Buddy Hield. So Buddy Hield is actually a very good fantasy player, but at the same time, if you want to get triples, then he's one of the more elite names that you want to get, and he probably won't cost you as much as a name like Steph or Dame Lillard, because he has been consistently hitting his threes and averaging 3.9 triples per game, so almost 4 triples a game. So he's one of those rare players in the league that can average over 3.5 triples a game. And his minutes in Sacramento are really safe right now. So over the past several games, he's seeing over 35 minutes, close to 39 minutes a game. And obviously his shooting, his field goal percentage can be better. He will deal with inconsistency issues. But I really feel like Buddy's ability to steal the ball really helps makes up for his fantasy value, and he's actually a really fun player to own. And moving forward, it doesn't seem like his minutes will be cut down because the Kings actually do need Buddy for his ability to drop triples. So in my opinion, Buddy is one of those names that isn't a household NBA superstar yet, but he's a very elite player to go after for triples. Now moving down the list, another name that I really like is Joe Harris of the Brooklyn Nets, because right now he's averaging 3.4 triples, and according to my standard Yahoo league, he's only the 78th ranked player. But overall, if there's one thing that Joe can do, is he can shoot threes. And surprisingly, since Harden joined the team, Joe's triples have been actually increasing. As you can see, he had some big games where he hit 8 and 5 triples. So I feel like playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie and James has actually opened really the door for Harris to get a lot more open looks, and his shot is so consistent. So on nights when KD or Harden is getting double teamed, Harris can easily help you get 3 or 4 more triples a game. Although I must say that the knock on Harris' game is that he does he's a little bit one-dimensional in that he doesn't contribute in many of the other categories. But compared to other shooters in the league, you can see that his field goal percentage is actually pretty elite in that sense. So definitely Joe Harris would be on my list for one of the cheap beasts to go after for the 3-point category. Now moving on, another name that I feel like it's really emerging as one of the best 3-point shooters in the league is Duncan Robinson of the Miami Heat. So in a sense, it feels like he's the new Kyle Korver in the league. He did really have a breakout party last year during the playoffs, but this guy can shoot the ball. If you want 3-pointers, then he's probably a good name to go after, especially for cheap. As you can see, he's also averaging around 3.4 triples per game and is a top 10 player in the league for 3-pointers made. Perhaps he might have benefited from the quarantine from the rest of his Miami Heat players, but even though when they do come back, I feel like Duncan Robinson's shooting ability is going to keep on the floor, because playing with players like Jimmy Butler, who likes to drive and kick, will give him the ability to get a lot more triples. And as you can see for his rankings right now, he isn't that high ranked in standard Yahoo category leagues, and he's not owned in 30% of the leagues. So definitely, I think if you need help in the 3-point shooting category, then Robinson is one of those names that if you trade for him, he could instantly help your team improve from an average team to a very good team. Now as we go further down the list, another name that I really like is Tim Hardaway Jr. of the Dallas Mavericks. So right now he's averaging just over 3 triples per game and around 17 points. But this guy, like the rest on this list, he can really shoot. He might not be the most well-rounded fantasy player by any means, but overall his minutes have been pretty safe in Dallas, and he's playing beside a very good playmaker in Luka. So if you were to ask me, I think every game he has a good chance to see at least 4 or 5 very good open triples. Like Duncan Robinson, I feel like Tim Hardaway Jr. doesn't really have to create his own shot, and as long as he gets open, he will have the ability to knock down his triples. But compared to Robinson and Harris, he's actually a better overall scorer, as you can see from his points per game. So in a sense, if you were to acquire Hardaway Jr., you're probably capturing the best of both worlds, as he has the ability to drop triples and average even over 20 points per night on a good night. So like I said before, if you want to get triples, it's probably not that hard to find compared to other fantasy categories. And as we go even further down the list, another name that I really like who could be a potential cheap beast, especially for 10-team leagues or 12-team leagues, is a player like Jordan Clarkson. So overall, it seems like Clarkson has found a role in Utah, and he's only averaging around 25 minutes per night, but he's still finding a way to average over 3 triples per game and is averaging close to 18 points per game and is providing some instant offense for Utah off the bench. So overall, I think Clarkson is a huge reason why the Utah Jazz are doing so good this season. And he's always had the ability to score, but right now it seems like he's taking his game to the next level. So from what we have seen this season, it looks like Clarkson has slowly worked his way into becoming an elite fantasy 3-point shooter. I feel like Clarkson can come in and give you over 20 points and over 4 triples per game. So in that sense, that every little bit really helps. Now going even further down the list, another deep sleeper that I like to call a cheap beast for the 3-point shooting area is probably Wayne Ellington of the Detroit Pistons. This guy, I owned him in a lot of leagues in the past, and he has helped me win the 3-point category consistently. Obviously, he's pretty one-dimensional in that you only should really roster him if you want to win in the triples category. But when he gets hot, he has the ability to hit over 6 to 7 triples per game. So for example, if your team has a high-end shooter like Curry or Lillard, then adding a player like Ellington might actually put you over the top for that category. And the last time I checked, he's only owned in 18% of Yahoo leagues. He'll definitely deal with some inconsistency issues in Detroit, but then when he gets hot or during close weeks, he has the ability to give you those extra 5 to 6 triples a night to carry you through a tough week. So Ellington is probably one of the deep cheap beasts that I would go after. And quite frankly, you probably don't need to trade a big name player off your roster to get him. And in most leagues, you might be able to find him just by digging deeper into your waiver wire. And finally, not surprisingly, Malik Beasley is another player that can get you over 3 triples per game. And like I said before, his minutes are pretty consistent in Minnesota this year. So I don't think they were going to cut into his minutes anytime soon. And he has the ability to drop over 20 points for you on a good night. And based on the stats we've seen, he's been able to stay consistent for quite a while now. So I think he's one of the more safer bets on this list if you want to go for someone who can produce consistently over the long term.